It's great to welcome Ann Neumann to the program today, author and columnist, and we are going to be talking about vaccines, Operation Warp Speed. There are really so many things to discuss, Ann. So maybe to start, Operation Warp Speed. I interviewed a Republican strategist recently, and she very adamantly pointed to Operation Warp Speed and Donald Trump as the reason why so many vaccines are now available. I asked exactly what Trump did. She didn't really have anything to tell me. So let's start there. I mean, what exactly did Operation Warp Speed achieve that wouldn't otherwise have been achieved? What was Trump's role in that?
Yeah, Trump set this up as instead of opening up the market to the world and trying to make these formulas accessible to everyone, he kind of made this pool of money that incentivized six individual companies. We're talking $10 billion, probably up to 18 billion at this point. And these six companies received a huge amount of money as well as exclusivity. So they were paid, say, 1.95 billion dollars for research, yes, but then also an additional amount for vaccines. And those vaccines, that payment was guaranteed whether the vaccines worked or not. So what it did was pool a whole bunch of minds in one place and dump tons of money into them with this concept that a free market, which of course is not free, right? That's like the perfect example of a form of socialism,
Yeah.
would accelerate the development of these vaccines. Meanwhile, the mRNA research was already being worked on by the National Institutes of Health. So, like all pharmaceutical innovation, this was grandly subsidized, not just monetarily, but also research-wise by federal entities.
Now, I've read I read things that are essentially it seems as though both can't possibly be true. On the one hand, I'm reading about how the pharmaceutical companies are not releasing the formula for manufacturing vaccines so that other countries could just start producing them right away rather than waiting on the supply flow from the companies that are producing them now. At the same time, I read that, for example, in 2020, I don't remember if it was Pfizer, Moderna, or both, said that they were open sourcing the recipe if someone wants to produce it. But it does seem as though there is significant infrastructure and fixed costs necessary to do that, where maybe it's not actually going to get vaccines to people more quickly if a new country wants to start manufacturing. What is the truth about that?
Yeah, it's really hard to parse because the IP, patent, special manufacturing categories. Also, there's a category undisclosed information. Like since the Reagan era, pharmaceutical companies have employed a whole raft of special categories that are covered and set up to protect their profit, basically. And so even though Moderna last fall, I believe it was in October,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, said, sure enough, our patent is, we won't enforce our patent, is what they said,
Yes.
which it was a great PR play for them. But it basically didn't do anything because there are these other layers of intellectual property enforcement that can be employed whenever anyone gets involved. And, I talked to Dean Baker for the article that I wrote for the Baffler.
Yep.
And Baker, who's an expert on intellectual property, said, there are many ways that the government could make this information available. So intellectual property is being used to cover not just the formula for the recipes, but also these techniques and manufacturing processes that really could just be disclosed as easily as any recipe. I mean, there's nothing that prevents manufacturers of pharmaceuticals from sharing that information as well, except that they're getting ridiculously rich.
Now, as a practical question, I'll give you one situation that's happening in Argentina where I was born and have a lot of family. Argentina is primarily using the Sputnik vaccine, which many love because it's open source. And now Argentina has announced that they are going to start manufacturing it. And some of my uncles are very, very happy who are loyalists to the current administration. But when I actually look into the details, the ramp, if it's even true, right? Let's assume it's true that Argentina will start manufacturing this. If it's even true, the ramp up process will take so long that by the time Argentina could be making any of these Sputnik vaccines, Argentina won't need them. And it will really be used to take something that's open source and sell it to even poorer countries in South America to make money in Argentina. So is that good, or is the scale up process really even possible to do quickly enough that it wouldn't just make sense to get an order in for vaccines rather than look at making them oneself? I'm just thinking out loud here.
Well, like anything else, it's distribution and information, right?
Yeah.
That's what hinders the sharing of any kind of material. And so distribution, access to the APIs or the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the technology and the materials could be better negotiated, right? There's no central power that is making sure that the countries who need this technology and these formulas are going to get them. And that's the real problem. I mean, there are a number of organizations that at the very beginning said, all right, this is going to be big, and as a globe, we need to work together to make sure that everyone has the same access, that medical ethics is employed in the distribution of these very necessary medicines. And obviously, Bill Gates came in, who's playing this unnecessarily large role in public health around the globe with an extraordinary amount of goodwill. And he basically co-opted the system to make it so that everything was run through large pharmaceutical companies. And so here we are with this crazy bottleneck. I also want to emphasize that in other countries around the world, there are other issues. I don't want to take India's Modi off the table as a stumbling block. People are making bad decisions all around the world.
Yes.
We also know that on other continents, including our own, there are corrupt governments and corrupt politicians. And so I think on the whole, as a globe, we were completely unprepared for what was coming our way, and we never had a strong voice. The United States never demonstrated any kind of leadership. And certainly during the Trump administration, we were incredibly isolationist in how our politics were discussed and mediated. So I think that America First isolationism also put us very much behind. So it's not just the fact that these vaccines are hard to get a hold of because of patents and these layers of IP protection, but it's that also the understanding of we need to work together to make sure this happens just isn't there.
When it comes to the dramatic increase in actual vaccinations that has taken place over the last few months, was this naturally going to happen no matter who was president, or does the Biden administration get credit for what they've done?
I think that's a good question. I think certainly Biden coming in removed a lot of the animosity. He's been clear with messaging. I think there was so much misinformation, whether that's by design in our current media landscape or just an administration that really didn't care about the rest of the world dying. Didn't care about the disparity in the United States, where Blacks and people of color were unable to access vaccine doses. So I think definitely it's a change, and tone and tenor mean a lot. But yeah, pharmaceuticals are going to pharmaceutical, and they are working non-disclosure contracts with countries around the world. That's a huge incentive for them. Not only have they kind of recouped their reputation with all of this, they've designed the vaccine, but they're also making bank.
When you think, let's talk about that a little bit. Is it that profitable to do this? And you read so many things that point in different directions. With Pfizer, for example, from what I've seen, the entire vaccination program seems to have affected revenue by about 1.8%. Now, it's such a big company that 1.8% is a lot of dollars, but in terms of year over year changes, it doesn't seem dramatic. So how should we be thinking of that as a profit center?
We should be thinking long term, because that's what the pharmas are doing. They're looking at the fact that we've got strains coming. Not only do we have, a huge percentage of the world that hasn't received a vaccine yet,
right?
They're thinking when the crisis is over, they can raise the cost of each dose to, the normal 125, 150 range, instead of the 18 to 34 that they're getting each dose now.
For the possible future variant boosters, for example.
But also for the possible variant boosters, not only just getting the vaccine out to the globe, but then following up. And this might be an annual thing for us, just like the flu.
Right.
We're not sure how long we're going to have to remain on this vaccination schedule. But also, the entire vaccine industry has been changed by COVID-19. In the past, Big Pharma wasn't very interested in it because it was, low cost. A lot of generics were being used.
Right.
And a quick aside here is that India manufactures 80% of the drugs that we use in the United States. So when we talk about manufacturing elsewhere, it's not like Big Pharma manufactures its own drugs anyway, right?
Right.
They farm that out quite often. And secondly, 70% of the materials for manufacturing drugs come from China. So the drug supply chain has already been precarious for several decades. So the vaccine industry never really appealed to pharma because it wasn't a big moneymaker. You get your smallpox vaccine and that's it. They prefer the very expensive drugs that have to be taken every day, say cancer drugs or rare diseases. And that's where their big money is. And so what Operation Warp Speed did was dump a whole bunch of money into the vaccine industry and make it very profitable and bestow a crazy amount of goodwill on these companies.
Last thing I want to talk about, when we think about the trajectory for vaccinating the world, and we know that there are countries that we're talking 2022, we're talking 2023, different estimates. One says 2024 until you really have full vaccination in some parts of the world. Ultimately, will the bottleneck be a manufacturing and distribution bottleneck? Will it be an intellectual property bottleneck? What is the one thing that, if it changed, could move that date up?
Countries are so different. Our relationships with them are so different. It's really hard to say. But I believe that it's probably going to be the distribution and the manufacturing and those special manufacturing techniques. And that's just a lack of coordination. But that's not to say, like intellectual property law is kind of the umbrella term for a whole bunch of things, right? So if companies are willing to share their drug patents, but not willing to share special manufacturing techniques, it's the same thing. They're causing other manufacturing entities out there from getting up to speed on distributing this.
Right. It would be like if I have a really complicated souffle, I could give you the list of ingredients, but the technique as to what I do with the ingredients is essentially just as important.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. We've been speaking with Ann Neumann, author and columnist. Ann, I so appreciate your time today to talk about this really important topic.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for covering this. Thank you very much.